Okay, and I think what happens is it confuses a lot of people because we do see some type of progress, we do see some type of growth, um, and so we stay content. So the first idea I really want to offer is this notion of not being content. As educators, we have to have a mindset of continuous improvement. We must have a mindset of continuous improvement. We must have a mindset of always thinking about what we are doing and making sure that we adjust, making sure, I'm just going to mute everyone. Here's some background noise. So making sure I don't like to mute because it makes me feel like I'm talking to myself, but I hear some background noise. If you don't hear me, just raise your hand or press in the Zoom, you can raise your hand or send me a message saying I cannot hear you. But we have to, in education, we have to make sure that we keep stay with a mindset of continuous improvement. You are never perfect in education. You're never perfect. Okay, Lena, you cannot hear me? Who else cannot hear me? Can everyone hear me except Lena? Okay. So Lena, it may be your microphone, so you might want to log off and then log back on. So that's the first concept, an idea that we have to understand, that teaching is not it's not a trade, if you will. We're not waiters and waitresses where we're kind of just serving the dish that the school or the government or the publisher, the textbook publisher, or the institute, we're not just serving a dish to people. Okay, that's important to understand. So what our job really is to help and facilitate understanding, to help and facilitate higher order thinking, okay? Allowing the learner to see it through their own perception, okay? So let me say that again. Our job as educators is to facilitate and provide opportunities of understanding, allowing the learner to process or synthesize through their own perception. Okay. Now, why do I say through their own perception? Because they have to see the value in whatever is being presented, whatever information is being offered. Also, when we keep a mindset that we are looking and that we are most interested in the learner's perception, what we're doing is we're naturally allowing for higher order thinking. Okay, so we're naturally going up Bloom's taxonomy, naturally, without a lot of thought, because we're most concerned about how, and that word how is important, how the learner perceives the information through their own perception. Okay, this is very important, because if they can perceive it through their own perception, they're able to do something with it. They're able to synthesize, they're able to evaluate, they're able to analyze, they're able to do all of those things. And we can have a meaningful discussion around that. If you're looking to only get the student to see things through your perception, then you're dealing with lowered order thinking. You're going to be dealing with lower order thinking. Okay. So now, with that being said, if you're going to work at a institute or a vocational establishment or organization where all they want you to do is be able to turn the widget, then that's the mission of your organization. So sometimes all we want to do is present lower order thinking to the people that we are providing information to. Okay? So if that's the mission, so for instance, if you work at an institute and the institute's mission or job is to train to train students on how to drive a car. That's a good one. Drive a car. Then you as a driving instructor, all you're concerned with are the lower order skills. You're not concerned with higher order skill. Your mission is to get the student to drive the car and get the student to obviously drive it safely. Okay. So we have to understand the mission. And this is kind of where the rubber meets the road, because when it comes to international schools abroad, and I'm not just picking on Saudi Arabia or the Middle East, this is the case from all over the world. When anytime someone is paying a tuition outside of university, okay, anytime someone's paying a tuition, i.e. parents are paying a tuition for their students to go to school, the mission of that school becomes very objective. Okay, it becomes very objective because parents I want my student to be able to speak English better. I want you to prepare my student to get into an Ivy League school. I want you to prepare my student to go to medical school, or my child to go to medical school. These are very concrete ideas. And teachers don't necessarily operate in concrete ideas. So this really strikes the chord, or really gets folks to talk about standards versus curriculum. And it's not even a versus relationship. They go hand in hand, standards and curriculum. They really go hand in hand. It's just your mission as an organization or your mission as an educator may allow you to look at these things differently. Now, for me as a K-12 guy, and as a person who, in many ways, as a futurist, as a person who looks at education as preparing the society, individuals in the society for the future needs of that society, I look at it from a very subjective standpoint. How can we get students to increase their higher order thinking through their perception? However, if you take on a more instructor approach, where you're saying, I just want my students to be able to build this, and that's it, you're going to take on a totally different approach to curriculum and standards. So if you're presented, for instance, I'll give you a great example from a school standpoint, from an international school standpoint, and from a public school standpoint. So, as many of you know, I have been an educator in the United States. This is my 19th year in education, but I've learned and went through my training in the States. And one of the things that, just like here in Saudi, we buy textbooks. In the United States, we buy textbooks, not necessarily every year, but normally every 2 to 3 years, we buy a new set of textbooks. And typically what happens is the school will create a textbook committee. led by who? Teachers. And the teachers will make a recommendation to the principal, and the principal is allowed to buy textbooks within her budget or his budget based on the recommendation of the teachers in the textbook committee. Now, that's a totally different approach to what you see here in the kingdom and you see in other places, because 80% of the time, I'm not going to say 90 or 100, but 80% of the time here in the kingdom and here in the Middle East and other places, the principal or the academic director is the one that's selecting the textbook, right? And then ultimately what happens is, in many cases, that textbook is not most appropriate and doesn't necessarily meet the needs of the learners. Because the people who should have been selecting the book, the teachers, the practitioners, they weren't involved in the selection process. However, in many of the schools, in international and private schools, it's a more objective mission. It's a more objective mission. Okay, we have a budget. We have to do these things within this budget, and we're not necessarily looking for students to be higher ordered skills. We just want the students to be able to do these things, right? And we can check off on the list whether these things were met. So that's why you will see in international schools and private national schools and even training, larger training companies, they might have things like curriculum departments or assessment, departments of assessment, right? Assessment departments, or some people call it continuous assessment departments, okay? You will never see this in a traditional school. You would never see a curriculum department, whether on the school level or on the central office level. You would never see that. Why? The curriculum is a community function, right? That needs to be looked at by the community. And who's the community? Everyone involved in the learning process: teachers, parents, administrators, and even business personnel, local business personnel. And they're part of the SIT team, the school improvement team. These things typically happen in government schools across the world. Why? The government schools are not looking to make a profit. So what they're looking for is the student to have higher order skills so we can prepare their society for people who can think at a high level, whether they become educators, doctors, medical doctors, engineers, pilots, people who can make higher order thinking decisions. And what we see in international schools and even training centers is that we don't see that same type of thing happen. It's more objective. We need the student to be able to speak English. We need the student to be able to do these grammar points, right? And that's why in the ESL community, there's a heavy value in grammar. When the research tells us that you don't have to focus as much on grammar. But if you go to any institute or any international school or any private national school, the teacher is 9 times out of 10, if you walk into an English classroom, there's going to be a grammar lesson taught. And when you're teaching grammar 70% out of the school year, there's no higher order thinking skills that the student can practice, because grammar does not contribute to higher order thinking. It contributes to lower order thinking, right? Also, it informs on the people that we hire. If you look at international school training centers, okay, the approach of these people are not necessarily teachers, they're instructors. And again, I don't necessarily knock that because it's a business. However, we have to understand, if we're going to do it that way, we have to make sure that we are being honest. And that at this point, you're not necessarily a school of higher thinking. You're just an institute. You're just what we call a vocational organization, where you're just going out. You have instructors. You don't have teachers, but you have instructors who are going out to teach certain points: how to build a car, how to build a house, how to install air conditioning, heating, ventilation, how to fly a plane, right? This is a totally different mission in teaching higher ordered thinking, okay? Because the teacher in a K-12 situation, in a traditional school that's teaching higher ordered thinking, she's not necessarily concerned about what that student becomes in life. He's not really concerned with that. Okay, that's more of a concern with the parents and other folks, but the teacher's not necessarily concerned about that. Okay, and that's why we normally hire what in government schools, in formal government schools, we normally hire career counselors, we call them guidance counselors, right? Because the guidance counselor would deal with those issues, not the teacher. The teacher doesn't care whether you become, the teacher doesn't care whether you become a McDonald's worker or a brain surgeon. What the teacher is concerned with is that you live a fulfilled life, and that you're able to use the highest ordered thinking skills working at McDonald's, hopefully with the expectation that you're eventually going to open your own restaurant and have your own McDonald's. That's what the teacher does. When you look at it from an instructor standpoint, it's from the standpoint of, okay, we have to create a manager, or we have to create a pilot, or we have to create a mechanic, or we have to create a soldier who can do this, right? And this is typically why the government will give those contracts to private institutes, because the government has a specific need. They need their employees or their people trained in a specific area. And these people are instructors, not teachers, because it's a different philosophy. And what happens is, if you take somebody from with a vocational mindset, and you put them in a K-12 or even a university environment, you're going to have a problem, because the missions are totally different. So what I'm saying to you, and that all those people who are listening, you have to decide what type of practitioner you want to be. Do you want to be an instructor? And there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to be an instructor that just teach skills, right? And their skills, they're not interconnected. You're not worried about interconnection. You're not worrying about interconnection. You're teaching someone how to do well on the IELTS test. That's it. You're teaching someone how to install an engine into an airplane. That's it. You're teaching soldiers how to operate a Bradley fighting vehicle. That's it. Whereas the K-12 or the university, in some cases, professor or the K-12 teacher, they're more concerned about interconnection of skills and ideas. How math is related to English, how English is related to social studies, how social studies is related to geography. You guys need to be going to sleep. Geography, and so on and so forth. Whereas the instructor is not concerned with that. The instructor is concerned with teaching the skill. And I'm not knocking, don't get me wrong, I'm not knocking either one, because I have done both. Okay, and both are needed. There are times where people need to be taught certain skills in a certain environment, and there are times where people need to be taught in a very holistic environment to increase their higher order thinking. Now, I said all of that to say something very simple. What are standards and what are curriculums? A standard is the what. That's all it is. What you want your learners or your students to know. That's it, right? So who creates standards? The community, the larger community creates standards. Politicians, governments, government leaders, the Department of Education or Ministry of Education, uh, principals, teachers, parents, right? Business personnel. Typically they look at what is needed 20 years out, 15 years out, and they say, okay, we need to create standards to meet these demands, right? So we have we have a group of kindergarten students coming in it's year 2019. When we're looking at standards for those kindergarten students, we're saying, okay, 12 years from now, from 29, let's say it's 2020, at 2032, when they're graduating university, I mean, not university, graduating high school, what will the society need? Okay, that's an a K to 12 perspective. From an institute perspective, it's what is needed right now. That's the difference, right? So from an institute perspective, if I'm giving you the contract, if I'm giving someone a contract to teach 30 of my students something, I have a need right now. So I tell that institute, look, here's the standard. I need my people to be able to do X, Y, and Z by the end of your course. You see the difference? So when you're an instructor, there's an immediate need, right? But when you are a teacher or an educator, the need is further out. That's why when you're a teacher, we backwards map, right? Well, we can backwards map on both, in both ways. Whether you're an instructor or a teacher, you can still backwards map. But that's kind of a different conversation. So standards are the what, okay? So for instance, in America, we have something called Common Core standards. And a lot of people mix this up and they think that these Common Core standards is a curriculum. Common Core is not a curriculum. Common Core is just standards, are just standards. That's why some people don't like Common Core and very critical of Common Core, because they don't understand the intent of Common Core. The intent of Common Core was to do exactly what I just said a couple minutes ago, is prepare a generation of people to be the leaders for tomorrow. So that's why in Common Core, it's not good enough to say 1 + 1 is 2. It's not good enough, right? The teacher's going to mark the answer wrong in Common Core. And parents get up in arms. Why do you mark the answer wrong? 1 + 1 is 2. No, 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 no. Under Common Core, the student has to prove how he came up with that answer and be able to have higher order thinking, analyze why he came up or how he came up with 1 + 1 is 2. Right? Why is that important? Because in the age of access, it's not enough just to know the answer. You have to know how you came up with the answer in the age of access. And this promotes synthesis. And so, but when people talk about Common Core, they talk very negatively about it because they don't understand the intent of it. Because it's just standards. They're just standards. Okay? So what is curriculum, you might ask? Curriculum is just the how. How you go about making sure those standards are met. That's all curriculum is. So what's curriculum? Curriculum is what the teacher does, what the students do, the learning environment. Textbooks are part of the curriculum. technology is a part of the curriculum. The janitor, the custodian is the part of the curriculum, making sure the building is functioning, the classrooms are clean. Parents are part of the curriculum, making sure they're doing ancillary activities at home with their students. These are all part of the curriculum. It's the how. So when you're a teacher and when you're an instructor, you're thinking a lot about how you're going to do it. How I'm going to accomplish this. How. And you're finding various ways to continuously improving the how, which is curriculum. Curriculum is not the what. Curriculum is the how. So when you go to university, you get a syllabus, right? You got the teacher or the professor will give you a syllabus, and that syllabus should explain the intent of the course and the how the professor is going to go about getting certain standards met. It's the how. So this is why we do things like in K to 12, we do things like scope and sequence, right? This is why we do different forms of lesson planning, unit planning, yearly plans, because we continuously looking at the how. This is why it frustrates me to the highest level when schools are not asking teachers to do daily lesson plans, and that the weekly plan is really only there for what? To appease the parents, to give the parents a piece of paper to say, oh, look, we're doing something, for your tuition. You gave us a tuition money. See, here's what we're doing. But there's normally no forethought or no interconnection of ideas with the weekly plan. It's just something that teachers are just throwing together just to appease parents. There's no real thought, because you cannot have a weekly plan unless you have a yearly plan. You cannot have a yearly plan unless the school has a master plan. So that's why I kind of went around the barn to explain standards and curriculum, because to explain standards and curriculum only takes 1 minute. However, it's the background information that people miss out on, which allows them or avoids them from not understanding the importance of standards and curriculum. I will end on this note because I'm 2 minutes behind. This is why you go into any international school, especially in Saudi Arabia, and you look at the mission statement. And the mission statement, 90%, I have not seen one mission statement in any school in Saudi Arabia that was student focused. Not one. If you go to any international school, 90% of those mission statements are going to be, it is the mission of XYZ school to be the best school in Saudi Arabia. That's what most of them are going to say. To be the most popular, to be the most famous, something along those lines. And when I read a school's mission statement and it says that, which most do, normally there's a correlation between that and what students are and the value that school is providing students. Because they're starting off on the wrong foot, right? The mission statement, the vision statement. The vision statement. What is your vision? Your vision should be student focused. If you look at Amazon's vision statement, it's not about profitability. If you look at Ford Motor Company's vision statement, it's not about profitability. It's about the customer. It's about providing a certain service to the customer that is unique, that solves a problem that the customer has. So with that, I'm going to unmute the system here and field any questions related to standards and curriculum. Does anyone have any questions? Yes, Mr. Ashan.
Yep. As you told that Common Core are like standards. So they are more like subjective.
The standards or the
Yes.
curriculum?
The standards.
The standards are not the standards are not subjective. The standards are very objective. The curriculum is what's subjective. So the standards are going to be very objective. This, by the end of the year, the students should know this, 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 and this. So the standards are always very objective, not subjective. I'm sorry if I confused you on it. The standards are going to be very objective. Okay. So when you're looking at your 16-week plan or your yearly plan or your weekly plan or your daily lesson plan, you basically can look at your standards, okay? And you ask yourself, what standard do I want to meet today? Like for instance, in America, we have to put the standards on the board next to the objective. Normally it would be the objective, students will be able to, and under the objective, the standard. So you're mindful of the standard. Now the objective is the what? The curriculum, the how.
And what about the Common Core?
So the Common Core is the standard. That's the standard. So for instance, at Al Sadara, for all of my English teachers, is I laminated all the standards for them. On a piece of paper, I laminated it. And I gave my teachers all the Common Core standards. Okay. Now, I know Al Sadara is not an international school, it's a national school, but I just wanted them to have a point of reference. So when they are writing objectives or they're writing their weekly plan, they have a bigger idea of where the students should be at the end of the day, at the end of the week, at the end of a unit, and at the end of the school year. Now, how they teach those standards, that's curriculum. Is that clear?
All right.
Standards is the what? Curriculum is the how. So a lot of times people will ask. I'm sorry. You want to have a question?
How they different from scope and sequence?
Yeah. So scope and sequence, that's a curriculum thing. Dina, is your question about what is scope and sequence?
What's the difference between scope and sequence and standards?
Okay, good. Very good question, Dina. Excellent question. So the better question, Dina, is what's the difference between scope and sequence and curriculum? Okay? Because what scope and sequence does is it allows the teacher to make sure they're on track to meet the standard at the end of the school year. So scope and sequence is a tool for curriculum to make sure you're on track from the end goal, which is making sure the student meets all the standards. So what scope and sequence does is it allows the teacher to look back on his teaching or her teaching to see if they continuously aligned and whether they need to reteach. So all scope and sequence really does is to have the teacher to think about their teaching in a very meaningful way. Look at scope and sequence like a journal, right? It's like a journal that you're looking back on, contemplating. Okay? So the teacher records what was taught. Not what was taught, I'm sorry, what was covered, because that's two different things. What was taught and what was covered are two different things. So the teacher looks back on what was covered and then look at what the students are able to do to inform their next steps. Okay, so scope and sequence is like it's almost like a guide to make sure the teacher stays on track. So at the end of the year, the teacher is most likely to more of the standard. The reason why scope and sequence is important is you can have curriculum. What is the goal between, what is the tool to make sure that during 180 days, you're actually you're moving towards the standards? How do you know that, right? And that's scope and sequence.
Right.
Yeah.
Someone turn on his TV, so I can't hear you well.
Yeah, whoever has the background noise, please, because let me see what I can do. Because I want to be able to fill people's questions. All right. So I'm going to say that one more time again. I'm going to mute you, Dina.
Okay, okay.
Okay, hopefully that's better for everyone. So the question Dana had was, what is scope and sequence and how, and what is scope and sequence versus standards? Well, we said that standard is the what the student will be able to do at the end of the school year. So let's just visualize this for a second. You have a first grader, okay? All right, you have a first grader. Let's call her Mary, okay? What the teacher is going to do is, before Mary comes into class, that first day of the first year, or her first grade, this teacher has standards. And the teacher is asking herself, okay, looking at the standards, these are all the things I need to teach Mary this year in 180 days, right? She has the list of all the things she needs to teach Mary, okay? Now, Mary comes into the class. The teacher is thinking about, how am I going to teach Mary all of these things and make sure they're interconnected? That's curriculum, the how, what she does, right? And she thinks about these things daily. She thinks about them from a global, from a yearly perspective. She thinks about them from a semester perspective. She thinks about them from a unit perspective, okay? And she thinks about them from a daily lesson plan perspective. How am I going to get Mary to know all of these things that's on this list, all of these standards, okay? That's the curriculum, her thinking about the how and her implementation of the how. Now, scope and sequence, Dina, scope and sequence would be the document or the tool the teacher uses to make sure that what she's doing, the how, is aligned with the standard, to make sure she's on the right track. And other people in the organization, i.e. the department chair and the principal, can look at the teacher's scope and sequence. Because think about it like this, Dina. The teacher has a lesson plan book, right? And let's say it's day 80. It's very hard for that teacher, right, to look through all of those pages to make sure she's connected all the ideas together. The scope and sequence is one document. The scope and sequence is one document that allows the teacher to say, okay, yeah, I'm right on track. No, I'm deviating a little bit. Or I'm moving too slow. Or I need to add this. or, oh man, only have 50 more days and I need to still cover 25 more standards. Okay, that's what the scope and sequence does. The scope meaning the big picture, standards, and the sequence is the how. Scope and sequence. Scope, standards, sequence, how. Scope and sequence. So it's a document that allows the teacher to make sure that by the end of the school year, Mary is prepared to go to the second grade. Does that make sense, Dina?
Yeah, thank you. It's
Okay.
clear.
Okay. A lot of people don't. A lot of people. They don't understand scope and sequence either. Scope and sequence is something that the teacher is doing and that the department chair is helping the teacher with. So normally, if I was your department chair, Dina, right, I would come into your classroom and I might ask to see your lesson plan. But what I'm really to help you develop and to help you really do well the entire school year, what I'm going to do with you, Dina, is I'm going to sit down with you and have a conversation with you about your scope and sequence. Make sense, Dina?
Yeah.
Because we can have a more informed, because Dina, when I talk to you about your lesson plan, that's a kind of just a one thing, a daily thing. You can say, well, yesterday I had a good class. You didn't see that awesome class I had today. Today wasn't that great. And unfortunately you came in and we're having a conversation that really isn't connected to the bigger picture. But when we sit down and we look at the scope and sequence together, I can look and visualize with my expertise and your contributions. Oh, Dina, I think we need to do this, or I think we need to adjust a little bit here. But what it really is, it's really there for you to do that yourself. And if I have time as the department chair or the principal, or even other teachers. So teachers, and this is why the SIT team is so important. If anyone ever becomes a principal, please create a SIT team in your school. It will, if you empower your teachers, the school will run perfectly. You don't need an academic manager, all that phony baloney stuff. You don't need Ray Roberts to come in and give you professional development training. No. The SIT team will allow the teachers to be empowered, right? As long as the SIT team has good leadership via the principal. That was a great question, Dina. Thank you for that question. Any other questions? Does anyone have any other questions? Mustafa, do you have a question, Mustafa? Lena, do you have a question?
Well, I did, but it was basically when you answered Dina's question, you answered mine.
Perfect. Hashem, do you have a question? All right. Well, hopefully I've given you, ladies and gentlemen, a real perspective on scope and sequence. By the way, excuse me, not scope and sequence. I'm glad Dina asked that question, but about standards and curriculum. And because you will meet a lot of people, even school leaders, even Western school leaders, that really don't understand scope and, I keep on saying scope and sequence. You got me saying scope, standards and curriculum, okay? Because, and they'll throw things around like Common Core or new generation science standards. They'll throw these things around because they're nice buzzwords, okay? However, I will encourage everyone to do the research, read a lot of books related, let me mute. Read a lot of books related or research related to these things. There's a lot of research out there. You can go on Google Scholar and it will give you a lot of research about Dina, you got me saying scope and sequence, about standards and curriculum and scope and sequence, because they're vital. They're vital to what we do, either as instructors or as teachers. If there's not any more questions, thank you for your time. All my TESOL people, I look forward to seeing you Saturday. And again, thank you for your time.
All right. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you.